Thank you so much, Virgil. And can I thank you for all the work that you've done in promoting palliative care available for everybody. And I'm going to address some of the deficits that there are. I put a few slides together just because I thought it might just make it easier for people to concentrate on some of the issues. So I'm going to try and share my screen now. Here we go. And if I can go to the slideshow, there we are. I hope you can all see that.
You can, Ilora, thanks.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So I was asked to talk about this, and I think it's worth just looking at how this bill has evolved and how some of the problems haven't been addressed. Because actually, by the time there was a second vote, support for it had fallen in the Commons. But the procedure in the House of Commons is that things get guillotined. And so there were a lot of amendments there that were never debated or voted on. So what are the problems that we have with this bill, and how does it leave vulnerable people unprotected? First of all, it gives the Secretary of State the power to change the fundamentals of the NHS Act. So the NHS is there to detect, prevent and detect illness, and to manage, to treat and improve the quality of life of people. Now, this would fundamentally change it into being a national death service, potentially, whether it's added on to the NHS or not. So there's a real question as to whether this is part of healthcare or not. There was court oversight previously, that's gone. There was a sense that at least there'd be open scrutiny. Language is difficult. Coercion is the thing that worries me most for people who are vulnerable. We know about domestic abuse. Tanny has already spoken about disability phobic attitudes, ableist approaches, ageism, and so on. But we know about subtle coercion, the sense that you're a burden, that actually you ought to stop being there now that your illness has gone on. We've all had patients, I'm sure Fergal has, I certainly have, who said things like, you shouldn't be spending your time on me. You should be looking after sick children when they've been seriously ill. There is a requirement to see if people have got mental capacity, but the way it's written in the bill is grossly inadequate and would not pick up impaired capacity. And I just remind you that actually people can appear to be really compos mentis. And then when you go into it in detail, you discover that they're extremely vulnerable to influence and they can't actually make decisions for themselves. The definition of terminal illness is so wide open that it could include anybody. It talks about a prognosis of 6 months. Well, you could toss a coin on that. You've got a 48% chance of being right. And doctors who are looking after patients like this all the time, who are terminally ill, and are not going to be stupid enough to say your prognosis is X number of months. The answer is we really can't tell, but let's plan for the worst and hope for the best. And let's monitor the progress of your illness so that we can see the direction things are going in. A very worrying thing is that the doctor can actually suggest this as an option to a patient. I don't think that giving them lethal drugs is a treatment. And interestingly, we heard in the debate last week when I raised the question is what happens though if the patient takes lethal drugs and then they wake up again? And the answer was, well, your duty to preserve life is there as a doctor, so you must resuscitate them. So the messages coming out of this are going in two completely different directions. We've raised the question of what if palliative care is not available? Now, I know in Ireland, you've done far better than we have in England and Wales in getting palliative care provision available. But we were told, well, if not's there, too bad. It's your choice. And what about if you're poor and you can't afford your heating and your life is miserable because of poverty? We were told it's your choice. So the protection of people who are vulnerable, who are in really difficult situations, just doesn't seem to be there. Well, also worried about relatives not having to be told and possibly simply getting a phone call to say, almost as Kevin had over his friend's mother, but a phone call to say, well, this person had euthanasia or assisted suicide. People who don't have the same language as their first language, whether it is the doctor who doesn't have their first language. Now, I think you have a few people, very few, who are not English speaking first language, but certainly in Wales, we have a significant population now who are first language Welsh. And they are much more comfortable at expressing themselves in Welsh to a fluent Welsh speaker than they are in English. What do we do if there are complications? That's not decided, and so on. I could go on. The worrying thing about the doctor raising it as an option, though, is that there is a power differential between the doctor or the senior nurse and the patient. We all know it. We all have to be really careful. And if we suggest something as a possibility in treatment options, we're actually giving a subliminal message that we know that what lies ahead is so awful, you ought to think about this. Palliative care availability, well, I've already addressed that. We now can ask the question, why do you want to die? Previously, that was not included, but I'm really worried about how that will be asked and documented. As for the doctor having a conscience to not participate in it, well, there are big questions around that too. But really, we've been told that feeling a burden would be valid. Ending your life for the sake of others, such as care costs, would be valid. These are very vulnerable people that we're dealing with and very easily influenced to feeling that actually their lives are not worth living. And the whole point of our role in palliative care is to try to improve quality of life. And it isn't required that there's a palliative care assessment done so that you really are making an informed decision. As I said, the High Court judge has gone. It's been replaced by a panel, and there's a real worry that that won't even be a face-to-face. And as has been said, it's a rubber stamp. It's like a veneer of judicial approbation. The drugs, how are they going to be licensed? People think that this is one tablet. It's not. It's a huge mixture of drugs with a complication rate. Oregon alone, 9 people have reawakened, 7 in California. And as I said, what happens then? The person's sleepy, drowsy, confused. I mean, it's a bizarre situation. And we know that death can take a long time. It isn't take a tablet, you'll be dead quickly. For some people it is, but the median is 53 minutes and it can go on to 137 hours. So it's a long, long time to be waiting for somebody to die when you're not sure what's going to happen. I think the data from other countries is really worrying. The red line is Canada. Canada were told they wouldn't be like the Netherlands, which is the orange line, but actually their rates have gone up phenomenally. And I think on Vancouver Island now, it's over 10% of deaths by euthanasia. It varies in different parts of Canada, but one's worried that it isn't just the terminally ill. And I can see how this, with a vague criteria, which is all we've got, how it will be expanded. So how many people would it be? How vulnerable are patients? What will happen to patients when doctors are taken away from looking after patients generally in order to do this? If we look at the Oregon data for England and Wales, we'd probably have about 6,500. But if we look at including euthanasia, and one minister made a verbal slip that suggested that actually injecting drugs might be on the cards, it could be up to 30,000 people in England and Wales alone. You can translate that on a population basis for Ireland. I've written a book, I've co-edited it with Julian Hughes, published by the Open University if you get this code, you can get some money off with it. That's a shameless advert for it. But we've gone through the reality trying to understand the issues, because as Tanny said, people think that it's a solution to bad deaths and bad care, and it really isn't. It's not going to solve the problem of bad deaths and bad care, but it's going to make a lot of people vulnerable to adverse influences. Thank you.